Hello and welcome to our LinkedIn event. My name is Ken Diamond and I am a cybersecurity practice development manager here at Insight. Today we will be discussing Fortifying AI, best practices for ensuring security. I will be your host for this event and have the pleasure of introducing our two distinguished guests, Anand, VP of Engineering AI at Cisco, and Jeremy Nelson, Insight's North America CISO. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ken. Super excited for the conversation today.
My introduction did neither of you any justice, so we're going to give you a few moments to briefly introduce yourself. So as our special guest, Anand, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ken. Really excited to be on this forum today. I was one of the founders of this company called Armorblocks that got acquired into Cisco last year. We were focused on using language models to identify emails that could be malicious and take them out, using LLMs before they were called LLMs, using language models from the early days of the LLM revolution. Inside Cisco, my team has two important charters. One is building an AI assistant into every Cisco product to make it easy for our customers to interact with their Cisco portfolio. And second is to look at how AI is being consumed across all of our customers and see how we can secure AI better.
Excellent. Jeremy?
Awesome. So I have the distinct pleasure here at Insight of both leading our cybersecurity services organization that really kind of focuses in around securing our clients' data estate and the way that they engage with and work with their applications, users, internal and external. But I'm also, as the CISO North America, responsible for our entire solutions portfolio and going through rationalizing that and making sure that the work that we do on behalf of our clients is always done in a secure fashion. So my tagline is that our clients should never be less secure because they chose to partner with Insight. So that's something that we take very, very seriously. And obviously with the onset of AI, everyone wants to know, how do they make sure that they're properly taking cybersecurity into account as they're looking to embrace this really industry-defining technology?
Absolutely. And that leads into our first question. How do we see the landscape changing now that we are in the age of AI? Anand, want to take it over first?
Yeah, so there's a few trends we are seeing in the market. One is Cisco has been running this AI readiness index for the last couple of years in the market and calibrating where customers are in their journey of adopting AI from a maturity perspective, from a protecting AI perspective and all of that. So I definitely recommend that as a resource for people to look at. But more importantly, as I talk to CISOs like yourself, Jeremy, across our customers and engineering teams inside of large organizations, there's a few challenges and opportunities. One is internally, every organization is looking at how they can adopt AI and more specifically Gen AI to improve productivity, to improve employee satisfaction, right? To improve customer support experiences, all of that, right? So a lot of significant investment is going into that. The second one is they're trying to understand how to reimagine their customer-facing products using AI and Gen AI and what that new experience would look like. And the last, any survey that you do out there, either the number one or the number two concern that CISOs raise is around protecting AI. They're afraid that some of the stuff that we read in the news, they don't want to be part of that news cycle. They want to make sure that they are using AI not just in a responsible manner, but also in a safe and secure manner. So those are some of the top concerns that we hear when we talk to our customers.
Yeah, I think one thing that I kind of add on to that is, when I look back at my career, right, been doing this a long time, and I think of a variety of different, we'll just call them end user driven transformations, right? I think one of the very first ones that I can remember within my career was really the drive around mobile devices, right? So you had this demand for these new smartphones and corporations were slow to adopt them. So what ends up happening is people start using them anyway, right? And so what ends up happening is that organizations then have to kind of respond to that event as opposed to leading it. They're now in a responsive type of emotion. I think we actually saw a similar type of behavior back in 2012, 2013, when cloud really started to come on. It made people's lives easier, right? So when you're thinking about people who are looking to be productive, they want to be able to work the way that they want to work, and cloud enabled them to do that. And so you ended up with these pockets of people who are like, if the corporation doesn't have an overall strategy and policy around it, I got a corporate card, I'm going to go out, I'm going to spin up my own tenant, and I'm going to work because this is the way that I think I'm going to be most effective. I think we're starting to see that same type of thing happen here within the AI space, is that this is something that's going to make people's life easier. I think Anand brought it up perfectly, right? At the end of the day, that this is This is employee satisfaction, because they want to be more productive. They want to work smarter, not harder. And so in all three of those instances, right, we ended up having to backload security, because the train had already left the station, and we're back there just pumping our legs trying to catch up with security policies and tooling and things like that, as far as best practices, to ensure that the enterprise's interests and data were being properly accounted for. I think the good news is that we've learned from those types of major events that have happened before in the past. And so, everything that Anand just said, I think is spot on. I think the big difference for me is I look at those other prior events, and I think organizations and even end users to a certain extent are like, hey, let's do better this time. Let's make sure that we're approaching this with a very mindful approach to security right from the get-go. And let's not try and play catch up, because I think the catch up in this one is far more damaging. I mean, we've already seen organizations where company secrets have been leaked out because of improper early adoption of generative AI and LLMs. So I think that is one thing that I have to say I am impressed with. I think some of it does tend to lean on some of that consumer fear that does sit within, but there is still some trepidation on the end user part as far as adopting it, whether that's due to irrelevance, whether that's due to, maybe unethical use of these different models. But I think one thing that I'm seeing as a change is that more people are being cognizant of the security implications and ramifications of adopting generative AI models early on, and having that part of the initial story as opposed to coming in after the fact.
Yeah, and a couple of great points, Jeremy. A couple of specific use cases, like you say, shadow AI is the new shadow IT, right? So if I'm a developer and I'm trying to write code, I want to write better code, and I end up using ChatGPT, that's a concern, right? Or instead of copy pasting from Stack Overflow, I started copy pasting from ChatGPT source code into my company's IP. That poses another risk, right? So from an end user perspective, from a developer perspective, these are very significant concerns. The other one, that if you look at the go-to-market side of the house, people uploading company confidential presentations or PDF documents, which are not yet ready for the market, to get a summary to help them with their job. So the desire is a very relevant desire. They want to get something done in a creative and good way. How do you enable that and empower them to actually do that? Either have your own private instances of LLMs that are run in open source LLMs that are run in your environments that customers can use, or find ways in which you can get tools approved that are custom built for your organization, that are third-party frontier models, but that instance is only available to you, and that data is not going into their training data sets or exposed to others, right? So these are some important concerns in today's world as organizations look at adopting GenAI.
Yeah, I love that. Man, I don't know if I'm supposed to go this far off script here, Ken, but Anand, one of the things that I think you said really hit home, right? Like, even as we look at these organizations, like making the smart decisions, spinning up their own instance, but coming back to your original question that you asked, Ken, right? Like, what is new? Well, I would say was old is new again, because a lot of that, even as these organizations are spinning up their own private instances of generative AI and these LLMs and the different data sets that are being ingested, is that it really comes back to, what is your pre-existing data classification and data access policy? And I think one of the things that we've seen, at least in a lot of the conversations I've had with various different security leaders at organizations, is that the default behavior of their user population is, when they go to share something, they just share it out with the whole enterprise, right? Because it's all contained within our walled garden. We're all family. Everything's trusted here. And so what ends up happening is you have these private instances of these LLMs that ingest everything that everyone has access to. And then the next thing you know, if you don't have proper data classification associated with it, people are able to go out and prompt for things that maybe they shouldn't be able to put their eyes on.
Yes, and we're seeing that AI is a force multiplier across the board. Whenever they implement it internally or leveraging it externally, it really does not depend on how they're consuming AI. It's how they're leveraging it for their business operations. And some of the security concerns is, if you do not have your infrastructure in place to secure your regular network and data and all the structures beforehand, it only makes it worse, because of the fact that if you do have compromised credentials or you have lax security within your data, you end up with these situations. Now, I did a presentation on securing AI, and we are at the age that the attackers, the bad guys, are leveraging AI to attack our systems. We are at that inflection point where we can no longer, as humans, keep up with it. So we have to leverage AI to secure AI, but you have to secure AI to secure AI.
Right.
So with that said, Anand.
Yeah, so this is a great challenge of our times, right? There's 4 categories in which this usually fits in. There is safety, security, privacy, and relevance. I'll probably start with the more difficult but least controversial one, which is privacy. Everything that Jeremy said, right? How do you do document level access controls? How do you do RBAC for login into these databases? How do you do row level access controls for vector databases and other systems of record, the data of which is being used to train these models, right? So that is just a classic engineering problem. I think we've solved it multiple times before in technology transformations. We can get that done, right? The second one is a new attack surface of security threats, right? Prompt injection attacks and the like. There's a lot of really interesting research going on around this. And if you've noticed, we just acquired this company, Robust Intelligence, as part of that as well. How do you red team models and make sure that you're hardening the attack surface around those models if you're using them to make sure that you have those vulnerabilities assessed and protected against, right? So back to our pen testing world, but in this new era of Gen AI, what kind of pen testing can you do on Gen AI models to make sure you identify the known vulnerabilities and you can go mitigate them with either natively or third-party solutions that you might want to have in place. And that is the most concerning thing, that I think we don't understand the entire set of attack surface possibilities in the world today, right? That we are so used to the software way of looking at vulnerabilities. The model way of looking at vulnerabilities is very, very different. Just to take some examples, and a developer might just download a model off of Hugging Face and start running an experiment. Now that model could be poisoned. There could be malware in that file, right? Some of the third-party model gardens don't actually do that verification. So that poses a challenge to a CISO who's now pulling their hair saying, okay, what environments do I allow my developers to download models from, right? The second is data used to train these models. So I'm a developer, an ML engineer sitting and building a custom model for a use case, but some attacker has compromised my S3 bucket and inserted some data in there so that the model and the process can be poisoned, so they can try to prompt inject that model when it comes out to production, right? I got to think about that. And more importantly, traditionally, when you do prompt injection attacks, you're looking at the traditional ways of protecting it, protecting my system prompt, making sure you're looking at the classical sets of prompt injection attacks where people are trying nifty ways. For example, like one of the things that I was reading yesterday, and I think I posted about it today on LinkedIn, was you can induce anxiety in a model, and apparently if you induce anxiety in a model, it actually responds to prompts in a more facilitating way than looking at the safeguards. Or recently there was a blog on bijection attacks where you fine-tune the model on a code, and then you ask it a question based in code, and then some of the guardrails don't function anymore, right? So security, there is a whole bunch of new risks that we just are not aware of, and we have to really look at what is best in class in the product to protect us against, right? Safety is the other one. That's the piece where you don't want to get in the news. Someone asked a model how to build a bomb, and your model is teaching them how to do that, right? And there's a whole class of safety and security standards that the MITRE Atlas framework has put in place, OWASP LLM10 has put in place, the NIST risk management framework, which is now going multimodal as well and looking at image-based and other ways to compromise models. So this is a very rapidly evolving class of attacks, and really you have to get using a solution from a cutting-edge provider that has both access to data on which it can build these kinds of models and protection, as well as the access to talent that knows how to go and protect against these kinds of attacks, right? That's the fundamental set of problems. And the fourth category here is relevance, which is kind of a nice to have, especially maybe in the Fortune 500s, which is to reduce cost. Like, for example, if I put a model out there, which was a retail chatbot, and I put in a relevance protection, everybody gets access to ask the chatbot whatever they want. They can ask it the weather, they can ask it financial information and all of that. And you're just at that point giving them free access to ChatGPT, right? So relevance is an important category as well.
Boy, you said a couple of things there. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ken.
No, so I was just a quick follow-up question on that. Do you see that going from large language models to small language models in that instance?
Yeah, I think we're going to go. Yeah, we're going to go into a world of multiple models for some of these scenarios, right? There will be scenarios where you use a 4.0 or a 4.0 mini, which you need because it is a general knowledge question, and these will get better and better. The frontier models will get better and better for general knowledge kind of questions. Then you have the code generation kind of questions for automating workflows, things like that, generating SQL, generating different programming languages, and you'll have models for that. And you're seeing the likes of Anthropic and others doing good work in that front, right? Then you're going to have company-specific use cases where I might take an OSS like a Llama 3.2 and fine-tune that for a particular use case I have because it's very specific to my company's products and my company's knowledge base, right? And specifically in security, you might start seeing small language models that are custom trained to do particular kinds of detection. Like, for example, we have a command line obfuscation detection model that is built using a small parameter language model and trained with a large database of real in the wild attacks that we have seen that are command line obfuscation attacks. And now this can do zero-day CLI obfuscation attack detection, which was not possible before, right? At a really good sense of accuracy. So especially when you look at the Global 2000, you're going to see a heterogeneity of approaches in the market in terms of the kinds of models and the kinds of use cases.
So I had a couple follow-up questions for you as well, Anand. So the first one being is that I never thought in my entire career that I would be talking about going through and doing the same type of social engineering training that we do. Like when you think about how much time and money and resources we spend into providing social engineering training and cybersecurity best practices to our workforce, I mean, it sounds like you're basically saying we're going to have to take almost a similar approach with the way that we engage with these LLMs and these generative AI models. Am I kind of interpreting that correctly?
I think we are still, it's going to be two phases. I think the first phase is to train our security professionals around this new class of attacks that they were not aware of. So the security teams, the risk teams, compliance teams, they shouldn't just blanket stop access to all of these, right? They really need to get educated on the value it can bring to the business. Like one of the things I did not talk about so far is just from an internal productivity perspective. There's a lot of ways in which it can significantly change and improve internal productivity, right? And GRC and security teams need to enable that, right? So there is some awareness to be done on that front. Once we cross that frontier, the next is absolutely what you said, Jeremy. Like as an employee inside of an organization, what is a net new surface area of attacks that I could be exposed to where the GenAI tools, I might be unwittingly propagating an attack that I did not know about.
Yeah. So the other comment that I had for you, would love your perspective on, is that, you know, DevSecOps, right, is kind of like that gradual transition for most organizations where you're really trying to shift left as much of the overall approach to cybersecurity into that whole development cycle as possible. Like when you think about, you brought up a great example, right? Like it's been the way of the world for ages. Stack Overflow, type in what you want to do, look for the code, copy, paste it in. But when we think about like, how do we shift left? How do we drive some of those security controls further left? Like in your mind, do you see like these generative AI models, these LLMs, are they like pre-developer? Are they post-developer? Do you kind of put like guardrails in after the code has already been introduced and tried to be committed into the overall source repository? Or are you trying to get in front of that? Like how do you kind of see that playing out?
Yeah, in terms of both scale of use in the market and then maturity in the market, the first one, which is the largest use case, is protecting the runtime environments. So protecting prompts, protecting responses, protecting outputs from vector databases that go as part of prompts. All of that fits into the runtime protection category, right? Second is protecting the build environments, the CI/CD pipelines for MLOps and LLMOps, right? Making sure that the models are not poisoned and the model environments are protected as part of guardrails, right? And third is the train environments, the data that goes into these models, right? So that is the direction in which this would go, right? The most common use case is a runtime protection. But then when you start bringing in your ML engineers and your AI and ML research teams, the rest of the environments need to be secured as well.
Yeah. So it is. That's a very interesting proposition because I think, and frankly, it's a great opportunity for organizations because it's way harder to try and do that same thing with a Google search and Stack Overflow, right? In order to be able to get the same types of protections put forward. So coming back to your previous point, internal instance of a generative AI model, and then being able to drive that same kind of process in the overall development and hygiene and life cycle of that environment. I mean, it actually is more empowering. If you think about shifting left, right? Like that actually gets past the developer into the sources that they would typically draw information from that make their life better and allow them to kind of meet the speed of development that has to happen within these organizations we support.
Yeah. And to that point, exactly like we were doing vulnerability assessment for doing an SBOM analysis of all the software that are part of our build environment and build process. A very similar process has to happen for models that are going to be used as part of a company's product as well, or even third-party Gen AI products that a company might be using as part of internal use cases. So similar compliance standards would have to come in place, and guardrails would need to be in place to actually protect against those kinds of attack vectors.
And with that, I attended an event about 3 weeks ago. It was a group of CISOs and CIOs here in the Southeastern Atlanta. And one of the discussions that we had was implementation of AI. And a lot of the organizations that were bringing these tools in for their developers were realizing that if they did not bring their own tools in, they were going to leverage these tools anyways. So it's better to have the policy, bring it in, and provide them with the tools that suit their needs, and at least you could have some semblance of security around it rather than having that shadow AI. Do you see anything on the horizon that could help us out with securing and reducing, I guess, the shadow AI?
Yeah. So I wanted to highlight a couple of things. One is to start with the responsible AI framework, right? Like any organization that is looking at enabling their workforce needs to have a strong responsible AI framework in place. And we have one on the Cisco website that's pretty well thought out, and all of us have to follow it. And coming in from a startup into Cisco, it was a little bit of a system shock when we started, and we had a 100-question questionnaire to fill out to start using a Gen AI model that was publicly available. But then you understand the value of that. Once you have that in place, it actually enables multiple teams inside of the organization to go benefit from it, right? But more importantly, if you look at what Cisco security story has been, it has been about protecting as many disparate attack surfaces as possible inside of an organization. So whether it is email or cloud workloads or the network or the endpoint or web, this is just another attack surface that needs to get protected. And you saw the robust intelligence announcement that we did recently, and that has been the premier team out there, a bunch of professors, an academic from Harvard, and a bunch of students from some of the top schools, building these models and having them in place to not just red team your environments, but also to provide you protection against what they call the AI firewall, to protect you against attacks, right? So you'll be hearing more from us on this front very soon, but definitely something that we are actively investing in.
Excellent. Yeah, that's one of the biggest threat vectors that we're seeing is we still have users that click on, I just want a $50 gift card from Amazon. Now imagine, hey, merge your picture with the picture of a cat and see what happens. Imagine the chaos that's going to ensue, right? And having the ability to turn that off at the endpoint or within your organization, at the firewall, within the cloud, and have that ability to protect. I believe the last count was 804,000 AI-enabled instances on the internet as of last month.
Wow.
And growing rapidly.
Wow.
So, now, the other thing, look at the tech debt that's out there, right? 5 years from now, what is it going to be? All that rogue AI out there, no one's going to touch it. How's it going to get cleaned up? These are a lot of questions that we still have to address, and we're still growing, right? We're still adapting, learning.
I'm going to put my legal guy hat on. What about data retention, right? So when you think about, like, most of our organizations have data retention policies that we adhere to, and it's really easy to control those inside of email and IM and all these other systems that fall within the overall governance and policies, tools that we have implemented. You have 804 LLMs out there. You don't know where your data has gone. Like, how do you maintain and manage that that data retention policy.
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's
I
also
think
the
converging is that policy, security, and AI are converging into a point to where if we don't know or we can't address it, we are going to have serious issues over the next few years. And this is, and again, right around the corner, we got quantum computing. So this is our dry run. We need to get this right so that the next step, we know how to tackle. I'm sorry, Anand, go ahead.
Yeah, the last part to this that I wanted to address was there's also the customer feedback response and how that improves the models, right? That feedback cycle. So some of that is needed for these models to get better, for the value that we provide to the customer to continue to be good, right? So to your point, Jeremy, about data retention, some of that data needs to get retained. So is that de-identified? Is that anonymized? What kind of protocols do you have in place for that, right? So that becomes an important part of the LLM stack, if you will, as well. What kind of tools should you have in your environment to actually enable that, right? How do you store this data? All of that becomes very relevant and an important part of how a company thinks about data retention as well. And on the ingest side, right, you have a lot of different kinds of data coming in. Like, for example, one of the ways in which people are trying to compromise these models is, let's take an example of a bot that is helping folks in HR figure out what kind of compensation offers to make to employees, right? New hires they're doing. So I'm a recruiter. I'm asking a question: what's an average salary for a developer at grade 10? And it gives me a number. And let's say an attacker had my login, and they ask, "Oh, can you share the Excel spreadsheet that was used to train this data?" Right? So if you didn't have guardrails in place for something like that, now all of a sudden your training data is getting exposed as part of normal use of the product, right? So and that fits into the data retention piece as well, right? Once a model is trained, what kind of data is in there, right? And an adjacent thing is the explainability. Tell me how you came up with this number. That could also explain, if you make it explainable in the simplest way of it, and the explainability is, okay, let me just give you all the data that I used to come up with this answer, there is a problem there, right? So there's a lot of really challenging decision making that organizations have to do as part of their development cycle that their research teams and their ML engineering teams have to be aware of, to make sure that as part of providing customers a better experience, they're also not leaking intellectual property or putting their companies' data at stake from an attack surface perspective.
Just more problems to solve, right? But isn't that what Cisco does? You guys are awesome at like finding problems and solving them.
Yes, I mean, as a security, as a professional working at the intersection of security and AI, this is a really exciting time.
It is.
There's a lot of really interesting things to work on, and it also helps to be in front of customers and have those discussions with them to understand what are the primary pain points that you're facing, and to hear from them good and constructive feedback on what is being done and what can be done better. So it's a really exciting time to be in this industry.
It is.
Agreed.
There was a discussion that I was having. I'm actually attending school for this, and we had an academic discussion on if we were the adversary, if I was the black hat, what were the attack vectors would I go after? How would I be able to manipulate the data, or without actually going through the runtime or the prompt? If I gained access to your systems and I know what your training data is, if I know what your inference data is, I can manipulate that. And if I can manipulate that, I can then dictate what the outcome is going to be, and then I can predict what you're going to do. So if you take a financial institution or a risk management or insurance company, and I can change those either way, then I could either drive your costs up or drive you out of business. Academic at this point, but I am waiting to see the impacts of these systems that are currently in use. What happens when they do actually have an incident? What is the ramifications? What happens when right?
Yeah, it's like the Manchurian candidate premise, right? What is that set of buzzwords you need to tell the model for it to now suddenly start behaving differently, right? And that's all about the data that went into training models, so that if you put it through a particular sequence of steps, it now suddenly starts behaving differently, right? So absolutely, I mean, that is one of the more difficult ways in which detection needs to happen, because it goes all the way back into the data used to train the model.
Now, there was some talk of having public policy enforced with these AI models, keeping a fingerprint, making sure that the developers, people who trained the model, who created the model, have that auditable, traced back to its source. Where do you see that going? Do you think that's a viable solution, or are there any better ways that we could kind of tackle this?
I think that's a must-have. I think that's just part of what is required of each of these organizations that are building these models. But increasingly, they will find it challenging to build native security protections into their model environments from the get-go. It's exactly the same problem, making an analogy back to the email world where I come from. If the email providers had top-class security, email security additional products would not be necessary, right? So they're trying to build a common set of standards for the broader set of customers that they have, and that's what they provide. And in the model world, it's even more challenging because the number of attack vectors is still not known. We are still trying to figure out what are all the ways in which you can compromise a model, right? More recently, there was some research that came out of Caltech that talks about attacking models from a control theoretic framework. How do you steer the model towards an undesired output? By putting a prefix in. And if you just do the simple thing of, I'm not going to put a prefix that's an English word, I'm just going to put any alphanumeric character, you now have several orders of magnitude more ways in which you can steer it in a particular direction, right? So a model provider, a frontier model provider could not possibly think of all of these possible ways of attacks and build that natively into the model itself, into the model infrastructure, right? So at least in the near term, you would need to have best-in-class standalone products that are providing you these guardrails that can actually iterate and solve for things quickly, which is not the primary value that a model provider is giving you, right? So you would need a third-party guardrail provider to actually protect you against all of these attacks.
Absolutely. And defining that source of truth and making sure that it repeats and comes back to that source of truth.
Right.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for the discussions. And I know that we could talk about this all day, but unfortunately, we don't have the time. Is there any final thoughts, Anand?
I think at the highest level, what I wanted to say was that this is not a zero-sum environment. I think this is net positive for us. When you look at it from a technology perspective, the way it's going to enable innovation, the way it's going to enable people to get more productive in their work, the way it's going to enable education. We didn't touch upon that. Just how people learn different things, including security, including technical skills, including back in colleges and schools, is going to fundamentally transform how humanity acquires knowledge, right? And as security professionals, I think our mission needs to be, how can we enable that process of transformation in society while putting good guardrails in place, rather than stifling the innovation or reducing the pace of innovation, because this is something that's fundamentally needed.
Absolutely. Jeremy?
The only other thing that I would add, I think Anand put a great point on it. I would just circle back to, yes, this is an exciting area. There's lots of puzzles to be solved, and there's a lot of people trying to solve these. And there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to be able to catch up with the innovations that are happening around the LLMs and the various different types of attack vectors that's opening up. But I think number one is keep your eye on the market. There's going to be lots of products and tools and things coming out to help to equip organizations to be able to address some of these challenges that we've highlighted today on our time together. But I think the other piece that I would say is don't wait. I think start having those conversations now, because if you don't, the convenience, the employee satisfaction, the capabilities, the outputs that you get out of embracing generative AI, they are real. We're seeing organizations that are absolutely going to being able to go to the bottom line and say, like, generative AI has helped us do X, Y, and Z for our business. So if you don't address it now, the security aspects, you're going to be back into the bring your own device. You're going to be back in the cloud worlds of 10, 15 years ago, where you're trying to catch up. And shadow AI is going to have your data distributed in ways that you probably don't want. So don't wait for the tools to come out. Start your journey now, but obviously keep your eye on the exciting things that are yet to come.
And with that, I would just say, I think it's forcing everybody to do their basic blocking and tackling. Now, your architecture, your security structures have to be in place, have to be verified, have to be tested. Everything from cyber resiliency to disaster recovery, All of that has to be implemented if you want to properly implement your AI systems. Without
back
it,
to the basics.
yeah, it's like throwing a laptop out without antivirus. Something bad's going to happen. So,
yep.
With that said, gentlemen, thank you very much. This was a fantastic and informative discussion. I look forward to doing the next one. And please, if you want to look up any of our other topics here on LinkedIn, feel free to. And thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.